Music saved me in my life. When I was a young teenager, I was very troubled. You don't want to know how bad it was. It was pretty bad. I was lost. I was confused. I was into booze and drugs and all kinds of criminal activity. But the one thing that gave my life meaning was music. Yes, rock and roll. It was fast. It was furious. It was raunchy and powerful. Kind of like my brain at the time. I guess it connected. It gave me some semblance of focus and meaning. And it spoke to me. Like many others, I had crates and crates of albums, and they were like my library, my everything. And anytime I needed to escape life or the daily grind, I'd peruse my selection and pick an album, and it was a real ritual. And I'd escape into a different universe. Of all the bands I loved and admired the most, though, and by the way, it's a long list because I had a lot of albums. I used to love bands like Queen, Sheer Heart Attack, and this was before Queen got overly commercialized. Supertramp, Nazareth, Styx, Bad Company, on and on and on. But the one band that really massaged my soul was Rush. Why? I don't know. I know they're a Canadian band. I know I'm Canadian. I don't know that really mattered. I was always proud of them, but it was something about the music. More specifically, their third album, which was panned by the critics. They hated it. By the way, interesting backstory to that album in the documentary, The Lighted Stage. If you're a Rush fan, you know about it. If you're curious, you'd have to watch the documentary. But when that album came out, it was a flop. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It spoke to me. And to me, that album was what Rush stood for. By all accounts, it was authentic. Maybe that's why it spoke to me. Who knows? So, when I saw them in 1976, it goes without saying that was my favorite all-time concert. I always remember to this day when the lights went out and they started with the opening riff of the first song, first side of that album. It was just like, oh man, my enthusiasm was wider than the bell bottoms that we used to wear back then. And higher, my excitement was higher than the platform shoes. Yeah, we used to wear all those. But over the years, when I got older and into marketing, I've often compared, specifically in my field of photography, and I think it applies to many, many fields, business or any art form, it doesn't matter, any creative output. I've often compared musicians and used them as marketing lessons. I try and explain to people that if you put as much into your craft as a musician, then you would achieve higher greatness. Many fail at this. They fool themselves into thinking they have talent and skill, which is often unearned. Their ego gets in the way. Mostly because they can, especially photographers, cameras and Photoshop allow us to cheat, so to speak. We get to jump to the front of the line and look at how wonderful we are. But there's an analogy that aligns beautifully with marketing. And let me explain it to you this way. Okay, I'm going to use musicians. Since that's the topic we're on, there are 3 levels of musicianship. Level 1, the kitchen musician. They show up, house party, campfire, and they start playing. Everybody has a great time. Da-da-da, they're often the star of the show. All right, there's that musician. Level 2 is the professional. This is where you find, typically the hardest working musicians. There are people at a community level. There are people in my city, your city, that earn a living full-time as a musician. I put them in the same category. They're professionals. All the way up to bands like Kiss and U2 and many other uber successful acts that they sell out concerts and they're loved by millions. And in this category, oftentimes putting on a show is essential. All the lights, all the smoke, the crazy antics that go on stage, including the makeup when you're thinking about bands like Kiss, and all that including epic drum solos. And then there's the level of, the third level, which is that of the masters. Now this is where bands like Rush, Neil Peart, Bob Marley, Steely Dan, and I'm going to throw in some of the best jazz musicians where it's all about the music. These guys don't need to put on a big fancy show. No drum solos are required. However, if you've ever been to a Rush concert, it's kind of standard that Neil's going to do a solo, but he really doesn't have to. We're going to show up. Most fans would show up for most of our favorite musicians. If they went up on a concrete riser and just played with their amps, it would be all about the music. It's always all about the music. And musicians like, say, Neil Young and Bob Marley, they fit into this category because they created, especially Bob, they created a brand, like they were cultural phenomenons, so powerful, so deep and timeless, that it all becomes about the music and not the show. So the music is where the mastery is. Let me repeat it one more time. It all becomes about the music and not the show. So Bob Marley invented and created a whole new style of music. And it doesn't matter what you think about reggae. I personally love it myself. Who else can say that about the amount of effect that somebody like Bob Marley has had on the entire history of music? Neil Young, too, is so prolific in his output. And to this day, even, his music is so authentic. He plays at festivals. My daughter was at a festival a couple of years ago, and she was 22 years old, and Neil Young was there. I mean, thousands of millennials were just taking him in. They love the guy. They get him, as we did back in the day. This, again, is timeless. So what you want to do is create material that is timeless and master your craft the way Neil Peart and all the others have mastered the drums. So if you took your skills and were able to transmute them into a musical instrument, here's a good analogy. So let's say you had skills in whatever it is you're doing, and you transmute them into a musical instrument. How good would you be? How good would you sound? Think about that for a minute and be honest. Is there a way to even measure this? Well, no, it's not really. It's a hypothetical situation, but it's a valid question to ask. So if you took your skills, let's say, for example, me as a photographer and you as whatever it is you're doing, and you brought the equal amount, say, to a concert violin as a violinist and stepped onto a stage, what would you sound like? What would I sound like? I'd probably be all squawky and squeaky. I'd barely be able to get out Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. At least that's what I think. And I've been at this for 39 years. And I'm still in it. And I'm still loving it. And in many ways, photography saved me as well. In a much bigger way, since it was, I was able to create a lifelong business through it. And I was able to manifest a lot of creative output. For me, I need to get out there and play all the time. I may never be as good as Neil Peart at that level of mastery, but I can try and I can dream, can't I? Thank you.